a few days ago, I made a video regarding collaboration because that's one of the things that I realized that I haven't been doing. And so today I want to go ahead and change that. So I have here one of my good friends, Patrick J. Sun, who is currently living in DC. And we've known each other for give or take 22, 23 years now since middle school. And I figured, what better way to start this project than to collaborate with one of the guys that I pretty much value in my life. And so just curious, Patrick, are you familiar with the episode, or not the episode, the TV series Lucifer?
Yeah. I'm a big fan.
Big fan. Okay. Obviously, Tom Ellis is such a sexy Welsh guy. Has accent. I'm pretty sure your wife loves him too.
She doesn't like the show at all.
Okay. I don't know what you're liking it to. But anyways, one of the themes that I saw yesterday was on regarding whether or not people can change their life, or whether or not people can change who they are deep down. And I want to say that people can change, right? Like if you put enough time and effort into changing, let's just break it down. For example, I've always been considered a shy guy, an introverted guy. And at some point I said to myself, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be shy. I don't want to be introverted. I want to be more confident. I want to be more outspoken. I went through all of the different phases, the different transitions, and sure enough, I made those positive changes. Yeah. But the one thing that I realized is that the one thing that hasn't changed are my value systems in my life. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of want to talk to you a little bit about what it is to have good values, because you've always been the type of person who I felt had a strong value system. So can you kind of just explain to me what it is? Let's first talk about what are values?
Yeah. So values to me, they're really like a word or a phrase to describe what we hold really sincere in our hearts, in our minds, in our hearts, and just kind of defines who we are. When you think of that phrase, people don't really change. It speaks to what do they hold true to themselves, no matter what mask they put on, right? And generally, if you have positive values, you're going to be a positive person, a good person. If you have negative values, you're going to be a bad person, And so values can go, one or another. Values by definition are not meant to define whether or not you're going to be a good person or not. They're just statements. They're just descriptors, and adjectives. And so how you use that and how you embody that becomes a really big thing. So like humility and empathy, or, respect, like those are values that people think they're just words without meaning. But when you start looking at yourself and your action, and more importantly, in my opinion, your decision, then values become really incredibly important to know about yourself in order to figure out where you can grow, how you can get better, and what you're not going to lose, so that you don't do something that you're like, is this really me? Like, do you really want to change into something or some type of person that you're not? So values help define that. But in the briefest way, it's just a word or a phrase that describes who you are all the time, like what aspect of you, a character or a trait, like all the time. So I don't know, does that kind of clarify it a little bit for you, like kind of coming at it from a different angle?
Yeah, actually it does. Yeah. So I guess talking about, respect, humility, empathy, where do people generally derive their value systems from?
That's a good question, because everyone has a different way that they get their values instilled into them from when they're very young. Generally parents and whoever is within like your first degree. So parents, close friends, or if your uncle or aunt or grandma or grandpa, raised you, whoever raised you generally instills their value system onto you. Then you're taught different value systems, frameworks, in my opinion, I'm Catholic, so there's heaven and hell, good and bad. There's morals that we learn. There's ethics that we learn. There's actions that we see that we like and don't like. So some of the values that we have are really derived from actions we see other people take that we don't want to do, right? So like, oh, I'm never going to be like that person.
But based off what though? So
Just
let's
based
say
off like an initial reaction, I would say, kind of your gut feeling is the best way to describe that aspect.
because one of my biggest question I would ask myself is how do people, let's say kids, like your daughter, you said you have a 2-year-old, 3-year-old daughter.
3-year-old.
How do they learn right from wrong that early on? Like how are they able to comprehend? Because I assume that's related to values, right? Being a good person versus being a bad person, being mean versus being nice. How do you teach that to your daughter?
So and this is where, for me, for like self-reflection, I had to ask myself that, right? Like you have to question everything about yourself before you can understand your values.
Uh-huh.
And when we're younger, we emulate whoever we see around us. And that's how we get taught what are our values. People who may seem very negative or like bad outwardly don't necessarily have negative values. They just have a very self-centered value system. It's me. It's don't infringe into me. This is my space. This is what I built. Don't take anything of mine. So there's that where it's a value system. Doesn't mean it's one that agrees with society or it's one that agrees with, even your parents or your family. But generally, parents and families will show behaviors and actions instead of words, though, because kids without speaking values will test your values because
so you say test your values,
like test your value system. Huh. How many times have you seen parents say to their kids, "Don't cuss" or "Don't use vulgar language," right?
Sure.
And then you turn around and then the parents go and have a glass of beer or a can of beer or a glass of wine, and all of a sudden they're like, "F this," and be that, and like what's dick, and like just it just flows out of them, right? And then the kids, if they're even a earshot away, or even if they have an opportunity to look at the parents' mouth, they'll put two and two together. They don't know what just happened, but they see it, they remember it, and they'll call out the parents. So if you ever wanted like your true, go to a kid. Like if a kid can call you out on something, then you're defining your own values in a sense, right? So all that is to say, we get shaped by everything around us, and then there's a few instances and moments in our life where we see something and we gravitate towards it. A role model. That's where role models come in. But for personal reflection, for like people, you and I, right? You and me, like we've grown and we've gone through our ups and downs. We take moments of self-reflection, and generally, you and I will probably be the closest of people to say people should definitely do some self-reflection, every now and again. You look at it, and we have to define our own values. So we're at a point where we have to say, "This is my value." You can't just say. You can't label yourself. Like just because I'm Catholic doesn't mean that defines my value of who I am as a person. Humility or empathy, like those type of examples, but I like to simplify and just say your values that you define for yourself are the actions and the decisions that you would take no matter what mask you have on, whether it's a business setting, a professional setting, you're in the market, you're in a family gathering. There's going to be this is the same value trait kind of, I'm going to show humility every time I'm in any of those situations, in any situation, right? I could be the smartest person in the room, right? And you still have to, realize that you might not be, I used to work with kids a lot. So humility, like you work with a group of like, second graders, third graders, and you think you know everything and more about them, right? But humility will teach you should stay open to the fact that the children can actually teach you back, right?
Like what? Like how can a second grader who's like what, 7 or 8 years old?
Yeah.
Teach you? What can they teach an adult?
So for me, this happened when I was doing a lot of like Sunday school teaching, right?
Okay.
And it was kind of when I was in probably my early 20s or so. And I'm in the class and I'm saying, if you pray for anything and you really need it, God will give it for you. Like God will provide it. And it's a very simplistic way of describing, you know, um, the trials and tribulations of faith. And without going into all that, this one girl raises her hand. She goes, so if I pray to God really, truly, deeply in my heart, to give me wings, he's going to give me wings. And like at that moment, like I had literally the same lesson I was trying to teach her. She was teaching it right back to me. And, my initial and my response right now would be yes. Like if you really wanted wings and it was in God's plan, you're going to get some wings. And you're gonna
okay. Whatever, right? Man. I want wings. I want to fly.
Yeah. But you got to be true about it. You really don't want to fly, Brian.
Okay. Okay.
So, but that's where humility was I was taught by that little girl, right?
So you're saying your parents taught you that?
My parents instilled it into me. I think I almost had it verbally beaten into me by my dad. My dad would always tell me, Patrick, you're a smart guy. You're even smarter than me. But I guarantee you're always going to be in a room where there's someone smarter than you.
That's a good life lesson, actually.
Right. And he kept me in my place. Like as much, there were people, when people are around you, like, oh, you do this so well, you're so smart, or you're, whatever, like they praise you. It gets into your head. And sometimes it's good, but if you don't check that, it becomes like your ego, your pride. And humility is the best antidote to pride. When pride goes way too far, it's humility that brings you back. In my opinion, and kind of what I was taught within my framework of life, right? And so there's always someone in the room that's smarter than me. And even if I think I know what the person is going to say, I should listen because I might actually learn something from them. Yeah, and you hear now business, people, you go on YouTube and you get like podcasts, and what do they say? Listen, you have to listen, and I guarantee you that person knows something you don't know.
Actually, let me. This happens to me a lot. Actually, even now, I try myself really hard to catch myself doing this. A couple of years ago, I'm pretty sure you might have experienced this too, where it's like you feel like all of a sudden you know everything already, and you're just closed-minded to everything. You're like, you know what? I know that. That is, I mean, you could say a closed mindset. Like, how do you change someone's? I guess I don't know what that's called, but like I guess a closed mind. How do you? You talk about humility, being able to absorb and say, you know what, I don't know everything. I don't know as much as I think I do. Yeah. How can you really get someone to change that mindset? Because that is actually a very common thing among people who especially graduate college.
Sure. It's a hard question. It's like, there isn't one particular thing that someone can do, right? I think you and I have both benefited from, self-reflection. We've both benefited from discovery. And we've both benefited from having people in the room better than us and smarter than us, a lot of that comes when either that person gets put into a position where it's forced upon them, so they're corrected, or it comes at a point when that person opens them up to be a little bit more accepting or a little bit more vulnerable. So if you're aware enough that you do it, I think the exercise you can do is to be approaching the next situation by being a little bit more vulnerable. So it's like you say, well, let me give my opinion, but I will listen to yours and tell me if I'm wrong. And most people use that phrase, but if you put it and you accept it, you might actually, open yourself up to be a little bit more vulnerable, at which point you start learning and you start listening, right? Because people will say, well, tell me if I'm wrong. They'll say a bunch of stuff. And then the other person is talking and they're like, and you can see them, they're just waiting and waiting. It's like, just just pause one bit so that I could tell you how you're wrong, right? And in that conversation, the person who's just waiting and waiting to always say something actually wasn't listening. And I'm gonna flip this on you. This is actually what they teach in leadership. When you're looking at communications and when you're looking at working within your team dynamics, right? Like the power of collaboration and team. The biggest thing that a leader always does is listen to his team, you know? So it's weird because first they teach you have to say something really worthwhile. Then you have to, learn a lot of things so you know what you're saying. And then when you get to leadership, they actually say, you can actually talk less. The less you talk, the more you know, the more you're respected, the more you listen. And the more you listen, the better you become. So it's this progression that I've ended up learning where I thought I had to be an expert to speak about something. That's not the case. I thought if I learned enough, I can speak knowledgeably and I can speak expertly about it. That's not the case. The more you get up into leadership, the less you actually have to talk. Everyone wants to kind of listen to what the leader has to say, sure. But usually the leader wants to hear what his or her whole team wants to say. And so that was, and that's a completely different mindset. But it usually starts with being, in my opinion, humble about what you know, what you don't know, and vulnerable enough to change your thoughts, right, in real time. And so that's just kind of like an example of how it, kind of goes back and forth. But for me, in that entire example is humility. Am I going to act like I know everything, or am I going to be someone that's going to be open to listen and hear something else and absorb it and process it, but it requires vulnerability. And I think that's why people don't want to do it. Vulnerability is difficult for us to I don't know what's the right way to express it. Like
to share.
Yeah, to share.
Because actually, it's an interesting point. I kind of realized the reason why I get along so much better with women than I do men is because it's easier to be vulnerable with women because it's easier to share and connect with them because women are more open.
Yeah.
The typical machismo man is very, very, he's afraid to open up and be vulnerable, right? To be able to, because the one thing that I realize is that when you're vulnerable, it's easier to connect with somebody. I can relate to you. Like, are you dealing with this too? Oh, you're human. You're also having problems. Like, that's one thing that I realize now is like, whenever I meet someone right off the bat, I'm trying to be as vulnerable and as authentic as I can be.
Yeah.
Not trying to put up a front,
I might have just done my thing, but there's also the way that men are raised or boys that are raised to men or boys to men, because we're from the 90s, right? Is to speak less when we're younger. The problem with that is we don't learn how to express ourselves well enough until the later stages of life, usually until our wives come into the picture.
Okay.
Or someone significant, versus girls who talk and talk and talk, right? As if we're saying it's actually a really good thing to practice. So the younger you are, if anyone listening to this and you're like, late teens, graduating high school, or like anywhere from like, high school to now, and you're male and you're like, man, I can't be vulnerable. I don't know how to open up. The best practice is to actually speak and continue to speak. We don't develop that ability as men earlier, and that's why girls are perceived to be more mature, because they open themselves up and they learn from it quickly, versus men that just get told what to do, how to do it, and just get better at that, right? Throw the ball, throw it this way, throw it this way, throw it this way, get better at it. You don't need to talk, you just need to act. And so there's a very difference where to be emotionally, manage your emotions and things like that, you need practice, just like sports, or anything in life, you need practice and you need to build a habit. And, for you and me, we didn't learn that until later in life, How many times have you, me, and our other buddies just hang out and we don't always, we don't have a lot to talk about, but we're cool, like it's good, it's fun, it's not awkward.
So actually, I realized the reason why there's nothing else to talk about is because most of us are not afraid to share what's going on with our life, right? Because part of being vulnerable is being able to share what's going on in your current life. Because I know, like, whenever you and I get together, or, the group gets together, we talk about, let's just face it, we all default back to what we were like in high school. We always say, like, oh, do you remember that time we were in math class?
Memory lane.
That's, but how often, it's like usually whenever we're trying to connect, let's say with you, and this is one thing that it's hard to do in a big group, right? But it's if I'm just with you together, we're having a drink, it's easier to just be vulnerable. Say, hey, this is, I've been going through this, so, this is my situation. I need some help, not even help. Maybe I'm just like, this is kind of what I'm going through. I want to share, because by me sharing my experiences, I kind of want you to be a part of that experience. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does. And if we were to like be, if you look at even our friendship over the years, right? Mm-hmm. Like in high school, early college, like even early college, you and I kind of, bonded a little bit closer, but we still didn't talk to this level.
No.
Right? And so, people might think, oh, you and I had this kind of rapport like for a long time. No, like, I mean, we bonded over StarCraft basketball and some of
Korean barbecue, man,
and Korean barbecue. Mm-hmm. Korean barbecue has got to be like the ultimate, like, bring together any culture. Like, I was a UN negotiator, I just bring Korean barbecue into the middle and people will be happy. Except for the vegan, the vegetarians, I guess. But but even then, we have mushrooms for them and stuff. But I would say, you're right. Individually is good, but what really starts to come back to even the start of this is defining what our values are. So I gave some examples of mine, like humility, empathy. I mean, like, have you been able to kind of figure out your own values, or like think about what you might consider your values?
Yeah. So one of my, I guess, the biggest values that I like to hold for myself is always showing respect to people, kind of like no matter who they are. I mean, it's hard to show respect when respect is not given back, for example, but you still try your best. Considering that I'm in healthcare, I'm in PT, some of my patients are not the best patients. They'll yell at me. They'll tell me, why am I here? Just get the hell, get the F out. I don't want to do this. But you still try your best to maintain that sort of respect and compassion, because you don't know what these people are dealing with, right? For example, it's like, maybe they're dealing with a lot of pain, maybe they're dealing with some, like, life or death situation, and so you just try your best to just say, I understand what you're going through, but you try to empathize and try to get an understanding of what it is that they're going through, and try not to take things personally. And that's one of the values that I like to hold myself dear. And I want to ask you, value systems are basically built at a very young age, right? Can you instill new values later on in life?
Usually, yes. You could always add and remove certain value statements, right? So one could be humility, and then another could be self-centeredness. Like, sure, you can make that switch as an individual, right? Like, you grew up in a well-intentioned family, and then like you had a couple life experiences, and people who you were close to that you thought, you could trust, they all stole from you, right? So at some point, you're not going to be as open and as, respectful, and you're just going to kind of worry about yourself, right? So people's circumstances, and usually takes like a pretty significant life event to change someone's core value. But when you're progressing through life, I would say core values don't really change, right?
Okay.
Even for like people that are known as soldiers, their core values didn't really change as a person, who they are. But when you're in situations where you observe something that shakes you to the core, as people refer to it, then you might see a person shift their core values. But when you ask the question, it's more about self-improvement. And it's more about like, can an introvert become a little bit more extroverted?
Like characteristic traits, it sounds like.
Characteristic traits, right. In my opinion, those are not related to core values. So you almost need to separate it. And so a different way to look at, besides what you do externally, are the decisions that you've made in life when you've had to make a decision. So the best, the most objective I could be with understanding what are my values are to analyze the decisions that shaped my life, either decisions or significant life events. You know, why did I decide to propose to my wife? You know, when I was faced with someone that ripped me off, someone that I thought I could trust, what did I do? You know, it's always looking backwards, right? Looking backwards to define who we are, but decisions and how we acted in certain life moments generally will tell you what your values are. Compared to, oh, I say I'm a hard worker, but I can't change my habit on this, right? Like I say I'm going to go, how many times have I told you I'm going to start exercising? You know, like that has nothing to do with your core values. That has nothing to do with, you know, my sense of humility, my value of empathy. But when I'm faced with a decision where I need to confront someone who I'm not, you know, I cannot work with them, or I can't stand to hear their voice, or, you know, like, even in that moment, they don't mean harm to me. I'm just being really negative towards them. Then how did I act? Right? And how did I speak? And when you reflect on that, you'll be able to kind of see if your values held true at that moment. So when you're tested, those are usually, so those moments will define you in your entire life, whether you're younger, kind of more in the teenage years to your early college and beyond. But they won't change. They shouldn't change too much, you know? And so a person is not going to really have like 10 or 12 values. They're going to have like 3 or 4 that you're going to consistently see in that person's life. Everything external changes with the wind.
Okay.
You know, the introvert, extrovert, self-confidence, you know, self-doubt, those are not, those are more the outcomes of whether or not we live with our values or not. You know, so if we say we're always going to be empathetic towards people and compassionate and respectful, you know, the outcomes of that usually are positive. But if you don't do that, the outcomes are negative. You don't think people like what you do. You know, you don't think people are accepting you. So you start doubting yourself, right? And it's probably because those are not your core values. Those are just your espoused values. You know, it's like a company saying, we care about all our employees. You know, and you're seeing it now. We care about our employees. They're the heart of the company. And as soon as times get rough, what do? Sorry, you're all laid off, right? We got to pay our shareholders. We got to pay our executives. We got to give our, you know, golden parachutes and things like that. You know, those are espoused values. People that just say it, they just throw values out there. So that company is saying, when push comes to shove, we don't really care about you, right? In the same way, when you look at your own life, the decisions and the actions that you make will tell you what kind of value system you have internally. At least that's what worked for me. It took me 35, 36 years of figuring that out, you know, like, and I had those values. I didn't really put my finger on it, you know. If you asked me 5 years ago, what are my values? I'd be like, I don't know, you know, just try to be a good person, you know, let's talk about something fun. So it's very, very different in a sense of now versus, you know, even a couple of years before.
Yeah, and just one thing, I feel like, you know, as you get older, you start defining what your values are. Like the older you get, I feel, because, you know, when you're young, you're still trying to figure things out.
Yeah.
Right. But as you get older, you start to realize what is important to you, what mattered more in your life, like those values. Like, what are those values that you hold dear?
Yeah.
Try to, live true to that. And the one thing I do want to ask, I guess, because you mentioned hard work.
Yeah.
Hard working is part of a value system.
Yeah.
And I asked you previously if values can change.
Yeah.
So I never considered myself to be a hardworking person. Like, I was the type of person I'd go home, do my homework, and I'd just play games all day, right?
Yeah.
Looking at myself now, I'm almost a complete opposite, where it's like I have the choice of just coming home, throwing my backpack down, turning on the TV, and just lounging around and not doing any extra work. Like, you've known my endeavor over the last couple of months. I'm hustling. I'm trying to make things work. I'm trying to do the hard work, like these videos, for example, websiting, blogging, and all of these different things. Like that, those values never used to be within me, but it's changed over the last year. So I guess my point is, so, okay, go ahead.
Like, you've had significant life events, that have moved you to this point. And in one sense, the one value that you've shown time and time again, from my perspective, looking at you, you might have gotten close, but you bounce back. If ever there was that definition of grit, right? I would say you have it. And it's like the single most defining factor for successful people. And grit doesn't come when everything's rosy and peachy. Grit comes when things are crappy, and however long it takes you to overcome that. Because if we were to do like an entire series just on your life journey, right? No matter what you were like before, but like you've had a lot of things that pushed you down, right? A lot of moments in your life where things were like working against you, but you still pulled yourself out of it, right? You were like, 6 figures in student loan debt at one point in your life, and that's all gone, right? You were and so you can give all these examples, but what you've shown is grit. You've been tested probably a lot more in a way than I've been tested, So if you think of it that way, like when you look at that value of hard work and grit, and what does that get you? Grit doesn't define the amount of success you'll have. It just says you have a foundation to build something successful, in your life, something like that. So that's a value that you have because in one sense, you've never given up and you've always tried to improve, whether it's video games or basketball or your self-awareness or, your confidence level, your speaking ability, whatever it is, you're still approaching it with the same drive, that same, I keep using grit, the same, because it's a value that you have. I want to be better at this. I want to get to a point where I'm happy, but even when I get to that point, I'm not happy. Like, like you just want to be a little bit better. That's a very defining, value and a character personality trait. I would say it kind of bounces back and forth depending on the context. But for you to be able to pull yourself out of your really low point over and over and over again. People might get tested once or twice in their life, right? Just the average kind of person. And anecdotally, for me to understand this, you've been tested, I don't know, like off the top of my head, like at least 5 or 6 times, within 35, was it 35 years? Right? Like,
well, if you want to count if I was like a single cell organism in my mom's belly, sure.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But growing up with a single parent, right? Your mom raising you. I had 2 parents. I had 2 parents with a bunch of family and friends around me, You had your mom and at that point, I think it was just like mostly just your mom, like 95% of it, right? Mm-hmm. So I grew up in a very more, what you might even consider privileged situation and environment than you did in one way. But just overall for you, I would say you've been tested way more than I've been tested in terms of that grit defining characteristic, and so I think that's really important. I think for people, and this is why I say, go back to your actions, go back to your decisions, and write down the 10, 12, 15 memorable. They're always in your head of, man, at that moment, I did this, and you'll start to be able to understand your value system that you have, it's not simple, right? But I would say it's something that I've started to tell the younger generation. I've started to, when I do a lot of student outreach for my work, and I go and talk to the students, they go, what can really set us apart? And I go, know your values, start defining them. These are students that are coming out of undergrad and graduate, just like kind of when you don't really care about values at that point. One kind of final example or last example I'll give on this one is, there was a question that was posed to them ethically. Is it okay to lie on your resume? And not even a full lie, maybe a partial lie. You were part of a club and you might say you were an officer or you took a leadership on something, but you really didn't. Just to make your resume, fluff up your resume, right? And how many times have we seen people get caught lying on their resume? They put some school, but they didn't really finish it. They don't have a degree. They just said they attended it.
They're not lying. They attended it.
They attended it, but when you put it on your resume, you're saying you completed it, right? So if you don't, there's an assumption. So like these are hard rules, right? And one of the professionals in the room when I was there, and we were talking about values, and the students were posed an ethical question. And these are civil engineering students. They actually, it was mixed whether or not some people were okay with it. Some people were like, never, right? There's one professional, he stood up and he basically said, you don't ever lie, ever. If I catch you lying, you're fired immediately. Like, if you even think you're going to lie around me, like, don't even bother, right? Like, and right then in that moment, that person, his value was honesty and truth, right? Like if you ended up knowing that person and you ever lied to him about anything, he would just cut you out of his life, right? Like he might forgive you, right? Compassion and forgiveness is some of those core values. But you could tell honesty was really important to him, and most likely not just in the professional setting, but in the personal setting, I could pretty much feel that this was really important to him. Same thing when you see compassion, like people are like, dude, you don't really know what that person is going through. Like, and that person, you might have had it better, but they're down. So you got to still help them. Like, those are when you see people's values, their action, and what they really see. So like, the next generation, the younger generation hasn't taken enough time to look at their values, but it's not really taught or even discussed at that really formative age, right? And but I mean, like, don't cheat, okay? I'm a failure on that one. I can't raise my hand, like I cheated my way through college, I think
let's hopefully that's not on LinkedIn if your bosses aren't going to see this. So
but like up until undergrad, I would say graduate school I didn't really need to, but like undergrad, like I struggled and got academic probation my first quarter. Like I thought it was smart, but so can I say that I've never cheated in my life? No. Right? Am I going to lie about it? No. Someone can ask me and be like, "What'd you cheat on?" And then I'll tell them. I'll tell them how I did it, hide it behind the graphing calculator and stuff like that. And
apparently that's banned now. You cannot program stuff in TI-89s anymore.
Yeah,
supposedly. So,
but that's where we need to start looking at ourselves, and so like our actions. So,
and that goes back to the value systems, right? For example, integrity is part of a value system. I would assume, right? Integrity, having good integrity, and that's actually one thing as well, where it's like if someone does lie to you, especially if it's a good friend, let's say, like if I let's say our interaction, like I hope you would never lie to me, I would never lie to you. But it's like I feel like if you were to let's say it's a bad lie. Like if you said, "Oh, I'm busy," but you're really not. You just didn't want to come over. Let's say, that's fine, But if it's, for example, like I don't know, you stole my girlfriend or something. I can't really think of a far-fetched lie that would break our friendship. I really can't.
Well, like if I borrowed your car and then I hit something and I told you someone else hit me, and right, like. And then later on, you could realize because you had sentry mode, and then like I hit something, like, and so I blatantly just lied to you. I didn't need to at that point, but then you're like, now I can't lend you anything. I don't even know, like everything. You start questioning all that, right? Like,
I guess it depends. Would you pay me back?
No, because I'd be like, right. So like that's where integrity comes in. That's where, but this is the question, the ethical question we were raising to the students too. Like, at any point, is it worth it? And you and I get, our age, we get to the point where we're like, well, there's certain situations there really isn't.
Yeah.
The hardest part about lying, and we learned this from TV, the hardest part about being undercover is that you have to keep track of which lies you're saying, right? So they say try to make it as true as possible and then just add in a little bit that's a lie. But like for us, when it comes to integrity, amongst friends, amongst people we care about, we should never feel like, we lie or withhold. Like even in that situation, if I did it because I couldn't pay for it, right? Like I hit, your bumper on your car costs like, 5 times what it would cost on my bumper, maybe 10, right? Like whatever it is, like because. Sensors and realignment and all that, whatever, like cameras and all that. So I don't have the money. I wouldn't have been able to pay for it. Your insurance didn't cover it. So then I'm going to keep lying so that I don't ever have to pay for it. That's what people do to each other in friendships that lack integrity. That person lacks integrity. And then you could tell who that person is. Yeah. So you don't know it until you're tested, right? So that's just, and it's happened to me. I thought I could trust people, and they, I was a little too trusty.
I guess that's how you know who really matters in your life. Because at this point, we don't really have time to waste as far as our friendships anymore. Sure. So I feel like all the people that I have in my life is because I trust them like 100%, right? Like I want them in my life. If I didn't trust you, if I didn't really care about you, I just like, whatever. Yeah. You're not a big deal to me, right?
Yeah.
And so, just I guess a few more. I guess last thing is. Regarding the protesting, like the whole, Black Lives Matter, police brutality, as far as like, police are meant to protect and to serve. Like, what is going on with their values to the point where I know there's always good cops, but seems like there's more bad cops than there are good cops. Like what, how can you, I guess, explain their value system, if anything?
I would, I'm going to be a little careful on this one. And this is, to me, there's no way you or I could even understand what it's like to be a cop, right?
Right.
And now, a lot of the actions don't seem like they're a lot of the actions that we've seen over the last, years. For you and I, it goes decades. Rodney King started it all for us. Right, like when we were younger.
LA riots, man.
LA riots.
Yeah.
But just seeing someone being beat up by cops, right? Then you get, and then you get all the stuff that's happened recently. I would say for the cops, and they're not operating out of values, like their decisions at that particular moment. Values are not kicking in if whatever values that they had. Or their values are a little bit more misconstrued to be rooted in things that are not considerate of their environment, and put it that way, right? So their values are rooted in protecting something that maybe doesn't align with what their purpose of their job is, or what we see the purpose of police are, right? We want police to be protective and serve and help us out in bad situations and fight crime and things like that, right? While they're cops, that might not be, their values might be misaligned with what their job is, right? So they just became a cop because it allows them to do other things or to, I know, like, it's hard for me to talk about because I do know good police officers out there.
Sure.
I've met them in my work, and so to put them all, but I mean, the actions that what we've seen are actions by people who, at that given moment, either their values didn't kick in, or their pride, certain negative traits, negative characteristics about themselves overshadowed their values. And that's usually when we fail, right? So if you're so proud of yourself, or if you think you're the best at something, or you're the strongest, right? That can overshadow any positive value you might have. You could have integrity. It won't matter because that's, and I use pride in a lot of sense, because pride actually can be leveraged for a lot of different negative stuff. And so I would say the only thing I can look at it from an outsider perspective, besides the horrific act, is that person's values, whatever good might have been there, was overshadowed by, a lot of the negatives that they had inside of them, and it could be just anything from misalignment of things that were important. It could be, tunnel vision, right? Like they're locked in. They're not looking and seeing anything else. They're not hearing anybody else, so it could be a lot of different things in that situation. But, that's also when, if we were to look back at it, we would say, oh, in the moments when we fail, none of our values came to place. And this other part of us, overshadowed, drove the entire decision making, right? So you could be a good person, but like in times when we fail, you might have 3 or 4 good values. Whatever negative things you have just overshadow that. It doesn't come through.
That's interesting. I've never actually heard about it. It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why you hear stories of people who did horrific acts and be like, I can't believe that they were the nicest person. This young man helped me mow my lawn and was always respectful and blah, 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 blah. In most times, people are generally good. When they're tested, the negative in them that builds up, just overshadows everything, you don't see anything else. Maybe he was locked in, maybe it was tunnel vision. I'm not making excuses for him, but when we talk about it from a values perspective, if you ask his close family members and friends, they might have all thought he was a great person. He showed humility. He showed compassion. He showed respect. He had moments of that. But in that, in George Floyd's case, that officer, but what's more telling from a values perspective were the officers on the other side that were just watching.
Mm-hmm.
They say, if they said they have integrity, they wouldn't let anything bad happen. You just saw that value system fail. And so there was something else that overshadowed and was strong enough to push their value system down. And that's what we always have to be careful of. And that's when we fail, is when there's some other emotion that can squash our value system, right? So it's a tragedy, and we're still dealing with the fallout of it. But man, I tell you, I have flashbacks of Rodney King when I was looking at all this, and like there were protests in DC. They were getting close to where like our office was and everything like that. Like I knew exactly where they were. I walked those streets, and you got protesters, and then you got the looters and all that stuff. But when and even then you ask, well, what about the people who are protesting, or what about the people who are causing mayhem? Whatever negative influence we have in our lives, if they can overpower our value system, we will exhibit negative, action. Um, and I mean that in the most general sense of way, right? Lying, stealing, whatever, and all that. But um, so, I mean, if one of the police officers that let it happen, that was around the main officer that had his knee on the neck, and said, I'm a man of integrity, that would be like, that's just espouse values. That's like a company saying, we care about our employees, and when push comes to shove, sorry, goes out the door. Um, it's espouse values. It's just stuff you tell people trying to get through it, but it really isn't their core value. Because if they had, integrity, they would have done something, right?
Yeah. So I just want to mention, so regarding the negative value system when it overpowers, I realize the only times those situations ever occur is when you're in a group situation. And I think a lot of it has to do with not being ostracized from the group, right? So going back, let's say, to the George Floyd case, where I think you had 4 total officers, but 3 who didn't do anything. I think a lot of it has to do with that police, like what's the group, like, not the mentality, but the group setting where it's like, we're all together, we're a family, like that family setting. So it's like
brotherhood mentality.
Mentality, right? So if if I'm outing this one person, essentially that makes me look bad, because what's the word I'm looking for? Like a narc, like I'm right?
You're right.
And I think that is the problem. Like, so in any situation, let's say you're with 4 of your guy friends. One guy does something completely against your value system. Like, let's say he just did something, let's say, to a homeless person, where it's like, why would you do that, bro? But you don't say anything because you don't want to be that guy. Like, bro, we're trying to have fun here. Where's your humor?
Yeah.
I think that's what stops a lot of people. It's like they don't want to feel like, I guess, lack of a better word, a loser.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I will push back on one thing where you said, the negative values overcome, your personal values. Usually it happens internally as an individual. It also happens in a group setting, like we've seen, right? So it doesn't only manifest itself in a group setting, is what I'm saying. It happens individually when just, imagine anything that one individual does, like they're responsible for their actions, for their thoughts, and for their inaction. I think what we're seeing also in this whole thing is the inaction. People are being more frustrated with other people for not acting, right? It's and to your point, like, do we call out our friends, right? The more innocent one is group of guys walking along, they see a couple of girls, they look at them, they whistle at them, they catcall them, right? It's objectifying the women, the girls.
Sure.
Oh, like, dude, look at her butt, like, look at her, blah, 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 like, right? Like, we all did that. I mean, a lot of us did. I won't say we all, like, for every guy out there, but like, you and I did that.
I don't know about me. Shoot, I'm too shy to do that back in the day, but okay, go ahead.
Back in the day, some of us might have done it, and then you just let us do it.
Right.
So you didn't act, or you had a moment of inaction when you felt that it was wrong. When, let's say, me and others were acting out on it, right? And so that inaction, that we're not holding ourselves accountable, let alone our friends accountable, translates into acceptable actions later on, right? It gets worse and worse, and it piles on until you get a check in that, and you push it back. So I mean, like, to the people that were, and most people, when they're faced with a very violent or difficult situation, inaction is a default, right? Like, you and I, we don't know yet what we would have done in that situation. People always like to say, well, if I was in that situation, I don't know, man. Like, there were people around, someone, if they really didn't want to see this man get killed, right? Like, sacrifice your body and get the knee off the officer by knocking the officer out, or like, just rush and just make the officer move his knee off the neck, right? Like, fight past it or something like that. Everyone around them enacted, because that's a very, very default. It's the fear. Like we're supposed to have trust with the police, but all that, the dynamics played out.
Yeah.
Inaction really does challenge your core values, right? If you see someone not being disrespectful, are you going to say something to your core value? That's the question for you, right? Like if I see someone being judging, and I try to hold empathy as one of my core, I feel that I approach people with empathy, and I see someone not doing that. Do I say something or not? Right? Some people might say it depends on the situation. When we talk about values, it shouldn't depend on a situation. It should be all the time. And you can do it in a respectful way, you can do it in a meaningful way, you can do it in a positive way. But it doesn't mean that. I think what we're entering into a period of society is that inaction is no longer tolerated, right? Like, or at least we shouldn't hold ourselves accountable. We should hold ourselves accountable for inaction, amongst our friends, amongst our family, tolerating racism at the dinner table, right? Tolerating bigotry at the dinner table, objectification of people, of women in particular, at the dinner table, in a family setting with extended family, cousins and uncles get together. Oh, that's just crazy, Uncle so-and-so, right? He's always like that, but he's a good guy. He's a good guy that just doesn't like black people, always talks down to them. I don't think he's a good guy, Like, inaction is becoming a very, how do I say, like, dangerous aspect for our society right now. And I think the protests are showing most of the next generation are not going to let inaction slide. You know what I mean? Like they're not going to tolerate inaction. We've had a couple of generations of inaction. That's why Rodney King, 20 some odd 30 years later, like almost 30 years later, you and I are seeing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Like the younger generation, they didn't know Rodney King, but I mean, we've seen it. So that means for that time period, anything on police reform and, culture and values and all that didn't move. It didn't move the needle. It's still the same, right? Like, I mean, so to throw a little bit of lightness into this kind of deep conversation, I am like the biggest rap fan out there, and not the biggest. Of
course you are, dude.
I love rap music, and honestly, like, I couldn't get out NWA throughout this whole time, right? Like, I couldn't get out, like, literally, like, just F the police, like, and it was crazy because it was reliving back in those days what we had seen, and all it meant to me from a very macro and outside perspective was that there's been inaction and there's been toleration. Like we tolerated bad habits or bad, we tolerated a lot of inaction as it relates to police brutality, police reform. And what people don't understand about, at least from my perspective of the, what protests going out there, is that the next generation, the current and next generation, actually doesn't tolerate inaction. You can't get away with it anymore. In one sense, our generation or the one previous before us, because you and I were like barely, I forgot how young. We were really young. We shouldn't have had
3 or 4. I mean,
yeah.
Shoot, man.
No, I think it was a little bit. We were a little bit older. They got out, they protested, but it didn't turn into much. It wasn't meaningful change enough.
I think it was different too because there was no social media, no smartphones, no video cameras at the time, so people couldn't document and they couldn't basically oust what was really going on. It's more of a he said, she said type of situation.
Right. Yeah, Will Smith said it best. Like, I think it was Will Smith. I saw it on social media, so I'll just credit social media. It's not that it's happening more frequent or it's getting worse. It's just we're seeing it now.
Yeah.
You know, like we're seeing it and we're not happy with it. Before we couldn't see it. We didn't know what was going on. Body cams on police cameras have been one of the like most transparent things that we've ever done as a society. And thank goodness, because if we didn't have that, if we didn't have social media, if we didn't have, cameras on cell phones, never would have been able to see this level. And the reality is it's been going on since and before Rodney King, you know? And so I think that is what you're seeing. So whenever you see someone's value not come out, it's because there's usually some negative aspect internal, individually, just individual. Could be group thing, whatever, but it's individual. Is that the negative overshadows anything positive, right? And that's failure. And we all go through it. We all, I failed plenty of times in my life. But, do you forgive yourself? How do you get yourself out of it? How do you pick yourself back up? That's a whole nother conversation. But that really becomes, something that's worthwhile to pay attention to as an individual. The more we grow. But yeah, try to tell it to as many of the younger generations as possible.
Okay.
Yeah, it's important. I mean, it defines us.
Okay. No, you're right. So anyways, I think we'll leave it at that for today as far as like how do we define our value systems? How can we create better value systems for ourselves? So is there any other final statements or other thoughts you want to leave before we cut this first collaboration to a close?
Well, definitely subscribe and watch all of Brian's videos. He's creating some excellent content. I think if there's anything that I've learned is the importance as it relates to values comes the more we're responsible, but everyone is responsible for their own actions, their own thoughts. So as much as you can, analyze your actions, analyze your thoughts, analyze your decisions, and you'll be able to define your values. So that's all I got.
So you said it pretty good, man. So, all right. Thanks a lot for being on this episode. And man, I hope to see you soon, dude. Let me to your house.
Yeah, we got to get this COVID thing out under control.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Man. So just send me the video and then I'll